From the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 53. Who could have believed what we have heard? To whom was the power of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before the Lord like a young plant, whose roots are in parched ground. He had no beauty, no majesty to catch our eyes, no grace to attract us to him. He was despised, shunned by all, pain-racked and afflicted by disease. We despised him, we held him of no account, an object from which people turn away their eyes. Yet it was our afflictions he was bearing. Our pain he endured, while we thought of him as smitten by God, struck down by disease and misery. But he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The chastisement he bore restored us to health, and by his wounds we are healed. We had all strayed like sheep, each of us going his own way, but the Lord laid on him the guilt of us all. He was maltreated, yet he was submissive, and did not open his mouth. Like a sheep led to the slaughter, like a ewe that is dumb before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. He was arrested and sentenced and taken away. And who gave a thought to his fate, how he was cut off from the world of the living, stricken to death for my people's transgression. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, a burial place among felons, though he had done no violence, had spoken no word of treachery. Yet the Lord took thought for his oppressed servant, and healed him who had given himself as a sacrifice for sin. He will enjoy long life and see his children's children, and in his hand the Lord's purpose will prosper. By his humiliation my servant will justify many. After his suffering he will see light and be satisfied. It is their guilt he bears. Therefore I shall allot him a portion with the great, and he will share the spoil with the mighty, because he exposed himself to death and was reckoned among the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and interceded for transgressors.
This can't be how it ends. I had so many hopes, so many expectations. I had seen his power. I know what he can do. Calming storms, raising the dead. Why won't he use his power the way I expect him to? Why won't he do what his nation needs him to do now? I have followed him from one place to the other. And now I have put him in this position. I had hoped maybe if I could back him into a corner that he might come out with that power. Maybe he might send those Romans back. My father and I have been resisting the Romans since I was a little boy. Fighting them is all I have known. They call me Iscariot after my father. The vulgar Romans in their Latin think that Iscariot means Scarius the assassin. That's a reputation I've been happy to live with. Anything that makes them a little bit more afraid of us and ready to go. How could he not want to fight them? Surely he understands that power is for using to overcome. And this man, this Son of God, Jesus, has the power of God at his disposal. I don't know what to hope for now. It seems that he's not going to free us from Roman tyranny. It seems that perhaps all is lost.
"Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." Peter said, "Lord, I am ready to go to prison with you and even to die with you." But Jesus said, "Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." Then Jesus asked them, "When I sent you out to preach the good news, and you did not have money, a traveller's bag, or extra clothing, did you need anything?" "No," they replied. "But now," he said, "take your money and a traveller's bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. For the time has come for this prophecy about me to be fulfilled." He was counted among the rebels. "Yes, everything written about me by the prophets will come true." "Look, Lord," they replied, "we have 2 swords among us." "That's enough," he said.
My name was Simon, but Jesus called me Peter, the Rock. I was a happily married fisherman, working with my brother Andrew and our friends James and John on the Sea of Galilee. My story begins some 3 years ago. Andrew had been following John the Baptizer, and one day he told me he has seen the Messiah. My interest was instantly aroused. We'd been waiting for him for so long. We were fishing one morning when this man, Jesus, came to the lake. We'd caught nothing, so he told us to throw our nets out deeper. We caught so much, the boat almost sank. I said to him, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinner." But he replied, Come with me, and I will teach you to catch men." He called James and John, and the adventure began. We travelled around Galilee and beyond, and Jesus preached, taught, and healed many people. I'm not a learned man, and many of his stories puzzled me. I asked questions, he explained, and slowly we understood more about the kingdom of heaven and how we should live our lives. He taught us to pray. Great crowds came to hear. He cured a blind man by rubbing mud into his eyes. Some men lowered a lame friend into a crowded room through a hole in the roof, and he walked away. He cured my mother-in-law, healed a paralysed man, and drove demons out of a man into some pigs, and they ran off a cliff. Then he raised to life a little girl, and then his friend Lazarus, who had both died. What powers he possessed! We saw him cry. He was one of us as well. He amazingly fed 5,000 people. He used my boat to preach from. And one night on the lake, he calmed a ferocious storm. Again, later, we were struggling against the wind in the boat, and he walked out on the water towards us. He called me to walk on the water towards him. I did. But in the wind and waves, I lost my nerve and began to sink. He took my hand and we got back in the boat. Once he asked, "What do people say I am?" I declared he was the Messiah, the Son of the living God. He took James, John and me up a mountain where he was transformed by a dazzling white light. We saw him talking to Moses and Elijah. Then a cloud came over us and we heard a voice, "This is my own dear son." We were terrified but amazed, and now we knew he truly was the Messiah. He told us several times he would suffer and be put to death. I remonstrated with him. The Messiah could not have this happen to him. But he rebuked me for trying to divert him from his chosen path. Always we had the Pharisees and Sadducees following us and asking awkward questions. Then, what can I say about this last week? He rode into Jerusalem on a colt. The crowds cheered and shouted, "Praise God! God bless him who comes in the name of the Lord." Then they threw cloaks and palm branches on the road. Was this what we had been waiting for so long? Next day he went to the temple. I have never seen him so angry. He overturned the tables of the money changers and drove them out, saying, "My temple will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a hideout for thieves." Every day he taught in the temple, even criticizing the priests and teachers of the law. He predicted the destruction of the temple. One evening, one of our women, Mary, showed her great love for Jesus by anointing him with perfume. This caused a stir and particularly upset Judas. Then yesterday morning, it was the festival of unleavened bread and of the Passover meal. Jesus sent John and me to Mark's father Simon's house to prepare a room for the meal which was so important to us. We gathered at the room in the evening, but then Jesus began washing our feet. I could not allow the master to wash my feet, but he replied, "If you don't wash your feet, you will no longer be my disciple." Quickly, to show my love, I said, "Do not wash only my feet then, but wash my hands and head too." He set the example for us to follow. Then he told us that one of us would betray him. Who could it be? Not me. He began the meal strangely. While we ate, he took some bread, broke it, gave it to us, and said, "Take it, this is my body." He took a cup and said, "Drink, this is my blood poured out for many. Do this in memory of me." He said it was to be his last meal with us. Then I noticed Judas slip away. Then we went to the Mount of Olives and the garden we often visited. He shocked us all by telling us we would leave him and run away. But I spoke up and said, "I would never leave him." Then he told me that before the cock crows tonight, I would say 3 times I didn't know him. I replied, I would never say that, even if I had to die with him. I had my sword. He went off alone and we went to sleep. But when he returned, Roman soldiers and temple guards came out of the darkness. The traitor Judas kissed Jesus and he was arrested. True to my word, I took out my sword and cut off the ear of one of them. But the Messiah told us not to resist. They took him away and we ran off. But John and I followed from a distance. We followed the soldiers to the house of Caiaphas. John went inside and I sat by a fire and waited. Then this girl came up and said, "I was with Jesus," but I replied, "I don't even know the man." Then another man said, "You're one of them." And again I replied, "I am not." Then someone else said, "My speech gave me away." Again I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then the cock crowed. I saw Jesus look at me, and I remembered what he had said. I went off and wept bitter tears of shame. I, Peter the rock, had let my Saviour down. We locked ourselves in the room, afraid of being arrested. We heard that Jesus had died and was put in Joseph's tomb. The afternoon had turned dark. Filled with grief and despair, we wondered what would happen next.
still speaking when a crowd arrived, led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. He came up to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?" When the disciples who were with Jesus saw what was going to happen, they asked, "Shall we use our swords, Lord?" And one of them struck the high priest's slave and cut off the right ear. But Jesus said, "Enough of this." He touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and the elders who had come there to get him, "Did you have to come with swords and clubs as though I were an outlaw? I was with you in the temple every day, and you did not try to arrest me. But this is your hour to act, when the power of darkness rules."
Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders and the people, and said to them, "You brought this man to me and said that he was misleading the people. Now I have examined him here in your presence, and I have not found him guilty of any of the crimes you accuse him of. Nor did Herod find him guilty, for he sent him back to us. There is nothing this man has done to deserve death. So I will have him whipped and let him go." The whole crowd cried out, "Kill him! Set Barabbas free for us!" Barabbas had been taken and put in prison for a riot that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate wanted to set Jesus free, so he appealed to the crowd again, but they shouted back, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them the third time, "But what crime has he committed? I cannot find he has done anything to deserve death. I will have him whipped and set him free." But they kept on shouting at the top of their voices that Jesus should be crucified, and finally their shouting succeeded. So Pilate passed the sentence on Jesus that they were asking for. He set free the man they wanted, the one who had been put in prison for riot and murder, and he handed Jesus over for them to do as they wished.
A large crowd of people followed him. Among them were some women who were weeping and wailing for him. Jesus turned to them and said, "Women of Jerusalem, don't cry for me, but for yourselves and your children. For the days are coming when people will say, 'How lucky are the women who never had children, who never bore babies, who never nursed them.' That will be the time when people will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Hide us.' For if such things as these are done when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?"
Better to have loved and lost, they say, than never to have loved at all. But you say, better to be barren, better than to have known this sorrow, better than to see one's child struck down. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way. Why is it this way? Remember when you were a small boy, the shine in your eyes and the smile on your face. Yet even then you had a certain way, a turn of phrase, startling us with the truth. And we know that not everyone likes to hear the truth. And there were those that said, "We should be harder on you, discipline you better, teach you to know your place." The problem is that you always knew your place. It just wasn't where we wanted or expected it to be. And as you grew, it became obvious that your truth-telling would get you in trouble. You were never malicious or spiteful or petty, although you were called all those things. You were simply willing to call a spade, or a snake, and those who were complicit, a viper's brood. It was such a joy to listen to you speak. Each one of us heard our struggles in your words. We heard your compassion. We felt your love. And when you said that love was the most important thing, it just felt so true. Love God, love one another. How simple it all sounded. But of course, they set to twisting your words. Who is the other that we should love? Do you really mean that we should love everyone? Even those who are not quite like us? What does love look like anyway? And if we catch someone in sin, is it loving to allow them to keep sinning? Is it loving to allow them to be condemned forever? What is love anyway? And when you beat them at their rhetorical games, it just made them all the more angry, more determined to shut you up, more willing to do whatever it would take. We warned you to be careful. We reminded you what happened to John. Prophets get stoned, and stones will break your bones. But we never imagined it would end like this. We never thought we would be following you to the foot of a Roman cross. You look so tired, as if the fight has worn you out. Not a physical fight, of course. You never used your fists. The fight to get us to understand. Your words were like riddles. You spoke of God in a way that we had never imagined. So intimate, so knowledgeable, so true. How were we supposed to understand? And when they called you the Messiah, we thought you might be the one. When we saw the crowds, we thought this might be the time. How long have we lived with this oppression? And you were going to be the one who would save us, who would overturn the government, who would restore us to positions of power and dominance, who would help us reclaim our land. The time would come when we once again could set the rules and not worry about what others would think. But your vision of victory was not the same as ours. If only we had known how to protect you. If only we could reach out now and comfort you. If only we could tend your wounds and soothe your sores, just like we did so long ago, when you would fly into our arms and hug us so tight. Yes, it might have been better to be barren than to travel this road with you. The tears spring from our eyes. The wails resound in the air. The groans issue forth. The pain too deep for words to express. Rachel once more is weeping for her children. We are weeping for you, our child. We are weeping for ourselves. Because it all looks so hopeless. And yet, where there is life, there is hope, they say. Maybe God will yet intervene. Maybe there's another plan. Maybe there's another way. Because this is too hard. You are our boy. We cannot watch you die. And yet, we cannot look away either. We cannot leave you here alone. We will stay to the bitter end. We will stand witness.
It was about 12 o'clock when the sun stopped shining and the darkness covered the whole country. until 3 o'clock, and the curtain hanging in the temple was torn in two. Jesus cried out, "Father, into your hands I place my spirit." He said this and died. An army officer who saw what had happened praised God, saying, "Certainly this was a good man." When the people who had gathered there to watch the spectacle saw what had happened, they all went home, beating their breasts in sorrow. All those who knew Jesus personally, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance to watch.